When I was in high school, there was a popular poster that was entitled How to Be an Artist. And it had all sorts of advice, like learn to watch snails, cry during movies, build blanket forts. And I thought it was great, but many years later I went back and looked and realized it was missing the one important thing, the only essential thing, which is make art. If you want to be an artist, you have to make art. Now, if you want to be a good artist, you have to make good art. And if you want to make good art, you have to make bad art. Or at least risk making bad art, because you have to start somewhere, and art requires risk-taking. Art is an act of faith. Even a single painting is an act of faith. And we have lots of great examples of people of faith. I love Nephi. He said he was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand that which he should do. And that statement sums up my entire career as an artist. Nephi was commanded to build a ship. This was no small task. There were no lumber yards, there were no YouTube videos, no instruction manuals, and to make matters worse, his brothers were world-class naysayers. They were saying we knew you couldn't do it before you even had a chance to get started, which for some of you in the fine arts department, you might read the subtext as, don't quit your day job, Nephi, or shipbuilding is fine as a hobby, but not a career. And to rebuttal, he went to the scriptures. Sometimes I like to think of the scriptures as just a record of impossible things that actually happened. And he reminded them of their posterity and said, remember how Moses was commanded to lead the children of Israel out of bondage? And remember how they walked through the Red Sea on dry land? Remember how they were fed manna from heaven? Remember the serpent on the staff and how those who looked lived? And then he topped it off with this. He said, if God had commanded me to do all things, I could do them. If he should command me that I should say unto this water, be thou earth, it should be earth. And if I should say it, it will be done. And now, if the Lord has such great power and has wrought so many miracles among the children of men, how is it that he cannot instruct me that I should build a ship? And my 20-year-old self wrote in the margin next to that verse, learn Japanese. Because when I was called to serve my mission in Japan, I had 6 years of Spanish under my belt, and the only thing I knew in Japanese was domo arigato. Mr. Roboto, I know you were thinking. I didn't know my first paid teaching job would be at the MTC as a Japanese instructor when I got my call. Years later, I wrote, play the piano in that, next to that verse, because when I was called as primary pianist, the only song I could play in the children's songbook was the first song, I Am a Child of God. And I told the chorister, I think if I work really hard and I practice every day, that I will be able to learn a new song every month. And she said, friend, that is not going to be good enough. We have our primary program in 5 months. We'll be performing 10 songs. We have Mother's Day performance and Father's Day performance coming up, plus you need to do all the birthday songs, the wiggle songs, the reverence songs. It felt impossible. And 5 months later, it was fine. Not perfect. If the Lord had wanted a perfect performance, he would have called a pianist and not me. But I felt like my efforts were being accepted and magnified by the Lord. Years later, I wrote in the margin, teach art to the blind. I remember the day I was driving down Vineville Avenue in Macon, Georgia, and I saw the marquee in front of the Academy for the Blind, and it said, now hiring art teacher. And at this point in the story, I always tell people that the clouds parted and the angels started singing. But what really happened was I just went, what? How? What is that even? How would that be? What? But I did feel inspired to apply, and I got the job. And I didn't start until 2 weeks into the school year. So I missed all the training. I missed all of the pre-planning. And I walked through the door of my classroom with my students, which means I didn't even know where the supplies were. And to this day, the only training 10 years later that I've ever received about how to teach art to blind people from presentations and workshops at conferences are the presentations that I've given. And the only just general college level art education classes that I've ever participated in are the ones that I've taught. So I feel like I know a little bit about how Nephi may have felt being led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand what he should do. There's a poem called Come to the Edge, which is attributed to Apollinaire, French poet. It says, "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We're afraid." "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We'll fall." "Come to the edge," he said. So they went to the edge, and he pushed them, and they flew. So 4 or 5 months ago, we had a field day / water day at my school. This is our swimming pool. One of my high school students walked into the pool area with his white cane and clicked it to the far end and sat in the risers. I'm going to call him Buddy for this story. He sat next to a paraprofessional who turned to him and said, "Hey, Buddy, aren't you going to get in the pool?" He said, "I can't. I am terrified of the water. It's a phobia. I will never get in that pool." And the parapro said, "Okay, I don't want to ask you to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable." "I do. I love making Buddy feel uncomfortable. That is my favorite thing about teaching." And he said, "What? Mrs. Applebee?" And I sat down beside him and I pulled a Nephi on him and reminded him of some impossible things that had happened in his life. I said, remember at the beginning of the school year how you and I made that goal that you would be able to walk from the art room the whole way across campus to your cottage, that's the dormitory, and how those people thought you would never be able to do that. I remember how we walked 100 times together. I pointed out every landmark, but the first time that I said, "Go ahead and get a head start, I'm going to finish cleaning up," you walked out the door of the building and turned the wrong direction. But I ran after you and I caught you and turned you around before you got to the end of the building. He's like, "Yeah, I remember." Remember how I said, "You're ready. You're going to do this by yourself." And you got 2/3 of the way there and then you got lost? He didn't know I was following him. But he was talking out loud to himself. He said, "Oh dear, what are these cars doing here?" Remember how long? It took you a long time, but you figured it out and you made it to the cottage. He's like, "Yeah." Remember how I took you back and showed you what to do in that situation, and the next day you went past that and you kept walking and then you stopped. I was watching from a distance and I said, "Hey buddy, do you know where you are?" And you said, "No." And I said, "Reach out your hand." And he reached out his hand, and he felt the door of his cottage. Now, how does that feel to be able to, thank you, to be able to get to the cottage every day by yourself? Yeah, well, it feels great, right? Okay, buddy, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to find a swimsuit, and you're going to put it on. And we're going to walk down that wheelchair ramp. You can hold my hand, you can hold the rail, but you're going to walk up to your ankles. That's it. I'm not going to do anything crazy like ask you to put your face in the water and blow bubbles. He's like, "Okay, I think I can do that." We walked up to his ankles. "You want to keep going a couple steps?" "Yeah." 15 minutes from the time he said he would never get in the water, he was in the whole way, jumping up and down. Look at me. I feel like, I don't even know what I feel like. Like a champ? Yeah, I feel like a champ. "Look at Buddy, Miss Allison." "That's great, Buddy. Can you put your face in the water and blow bubbles?" "I don't know how I can ever repay you, Miss Applebee. How can I ever thank you?" And I told him, "You can thank me by trusting me. I will never ask you to do anything that's wrong or immoral, but I will ask you to step outside your comfort zone. I'm going to ask you to do things you've never done before because that's the only way to learn how to do things you've never done before. It's my job." I feel like I've heard the Lord say the same thing to me. "Kristen, I think I've proven myself by now. You can trust me. Come to the edge." Because, according to Helen Keller, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Georgia O'Keeffe said she's been terrified every moment of her life, but she never let it stop her from doing anything she wanted to. We're going to have to do things we've never done before, things that are uncomfortable. I had a bishop in Ohio who said that my generation would change careers 5 times throughout my lifetime. The next year I got married, And I think we had 11 sources of income on our tax return. We were both studio artists, making and selling art through galleries. We were both studio assistants, helping with large-scale installation pieces. I was working, developing film at a camera shop until my professor called and said, "I'm leaving the country, will you be my sabbatical replacement?" My husband was doing graphic design for 20 hours a week. My idea of what it was to be an artist was so narrow and has widened so much. And I know so many of my friends here who I was taking classes with, foundation classes, had no idea that they would end up being a book curator or designing IKEA furniture displays or having a nativity design company. There's just so many ways that we can use our knowledge and our art. It applies to everything. When I was a kid, I didn't know that the doors hadn't been made yet that I was going to walk through. It's not just a matter of waiting for someone to open the door. You have to wait for the door to be built. So when I was little and somebody said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I never would have said, "Oh, I want to be an owner of a web development company," because I had never heard of the internet. Nobody I knew had ever heard of the internet. It was the 70s. I didn't even own a computer until after graduate school, just a few months before we opened a web development company with some of our friends. The job I have now didn't even exist for 2 years when I applied for it, and our school's 170 years old. So you just don't even know the possibilities that are out there. When you start a drawing, you start with the big stuff first. You're laying in the foundation of the composition. And then you move to the middle-sized pieces, and then the smaller pieces. All the while you're going back and you're tweaking and readjusting the proportions, the proximity of objects, the linear perspective lines. You don't call those first lines that you drew mistakes. You call it drawing. It's just part of the process. You're learning the still life the same way that you're learning life, which is precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. Here a little and there a little. And those early experiences, those first lines you drew, aren't just a means to the end. They aren't just the way that you get to where you need to be. They add to the complexity and the depth and the richness and the beauty of the finished piece. Annie Sullivan, she was the teacher of Helen Keller, said, "Keep on beginning and failing. Each time you fail, start over again, and you will grow stronger until you have accomplished a purpose, not one you began with perhaps, but one you'll be glad to remember." If you have a problem with the word failing, just call it learning. Keep on beginning and learning. Each time you learn from an experience, start over again, and you'll grow stronger. I personally don't have a problem with failure. I tell my students all the time, fail harder. You're not failing hard enough. What's our rule about mistakes? Well, we don't have a rule. We're allowed to make them, but I always have one kid in the class who's like, "Don't give up. Keep on trying," which I love. I dabbled in the kiddie lit for a little bit, children's literature. I love picture books. I love illustration. And I wrote a 60,000-word young adult novel. Was I worried that it was going to stink? Of course not. That was a given. How could it not stink? I wasn't an English major. I didn't even like reading young adult novels when I was a young adult. I just had this idea, and I wanted to do it, so I did it. And I think that's what we should do in life. Give yourself permission to do things badly. Give yourself permission to failure. That might not be the most popular thing in Provo, Utah all the time, but I think it's an important thing. I can still hear my students saying, "Keep on trying, keep on, don't give up." And Elder Uchtdorf has said the same thing. Try and keep on trying until that which seems difficult becomes possible, and that which seems only possible becomes habit and a real part of you. Here's a little peek into some of my student work. And my student who said, "Miss Applebee, the shirt doesn't fit me," his head was in the sleeve hole. One of the challenges I have is that I teach kindergarten through 12th grade, well, pre-K through 12th grade. So that's ages 4 through 22. So some of the students I have now in high school, I taught them in elementary school, and I taught them in middle school. And some of the students that I have taught for 4 years in high school are in classes with first and second year students. So it's hard for me to have a rotating curriculum that I just pull out my lesson plans or what I did 2 years ago and rotate it through. I kind of have to start from scratch every year. And last year I was like, oh man, this is my 9th year. What haven't I taught yet? Oh, I've never done a unit on photography. That could be fun. So my students learned everything about photographers, from Alfred Stieglitz all the way up to Sandy Skolgan. They learned about their lives and their style, and we experimented with projects kind of based on those people, Baldessari and Mead. And then from our photography unit, we went into cinematography. What do I know about cinematography? I've never done animation before. I've never made a single little claymation film. We'll figure it out. I believe in doing things badly. So we're just pushing bottle caps around, and we're just pushing magnetic letters. And a week into it, I was like, okay, we're ready. We're going to graduate. We're going to do claymation. And a week or so after that, I was like, these are actually pretty cute. We had some original student songs, and we made some kind of charming films. And I said, I don't want to just put this on a link in an email that I send out. I want to see it on the big screen. Let's have a film festival. It'll be like an animation celebration world premiere. And so I dressed up my students. We found gowns and these like $200 brand new shirts and $100 ties that had been donated to the school. And they learned their parts, and we invited the whole school to this event and had refreshments. Everybody loved it. And I'm starting just now to understand the power that art has to bring people together and to recognize that this thing that didn't exist before does exist now, and it only exists because we made it. If we didn't exist, it wouldn't exist. So claymation led into clay, and we added another totem pole to our sensory garden. We have 2 now. I said, let's make a big deal about it. Let's have an unveiling ceremony, and we'll invite the whole school. So the chorus came, and they sang the alma mater. We had the cheerleaders participate. We had the drum corps participate. It was just a little 15-minute thing, but I love the idea of celebrating making things. Our clay unit also led to ornaments, clay ornaments for our Peace, Love, and Braille tree that we did for the Museum of Art and Science. They have a festival of trees every year. And we've been participating because it's good to support the museum's biggest fundraiser of the year. It's also a way for us to advocate for our disability, and it's also a way to take my students into the museum, and then they just let us explore while we're there, so it's like a free field trip. While we were there last November, the curator of education found me and said, I've been wanting to find you guys. I've been wanting to talk to you. I just got this grant about how to make displays more accessible. I don't know how to do that. Can I work with you? It was a science grant, so we worked with the middle school and the high school science teachers. They aligned with their curriculum, their standards, and said, okay, we both have to teach the layers of the atmosphere. I said, hey, I'm art. I can teach anything. There is no discipline that I'm not allowed to teach. All of these. Art is such a part of the human experience that I love it. So they went ahead and made their own sculpture of the layers of the atmosphere in their class. But we had talked about using elements of sound. And after 2 weeks of doing claymation, we thought we were experts, and we're like, we'll just do like a Schoolhouse Rock type of video where people can listen to the information who can't see it. And we wrote 6 little jingles and performed them and made a claymation about each layer and an overview. The museum bought a television set for our video. It's been playing on loop for the last 6 months. If you come today, you could go see it. And so it's just something that we like to do, to be part of the community. Never done it before. It's okay. It's okay to be bad at something. It's okay to do your best and try it and see what happens. Goodwill. It's a thrift store across the street from the college where my husband teaches. So I would go to a bunch of student shows there, and I said, hey, what about my students? Do you think they could show here? And the lady in charge is like, well, I don't know. She came and saw their stuff and said, yeah, you can have a show. So they brought all the fancy hors d'oeuvres. We made a field trip. This led to another student show, which led to internships happening for our students to learn about retail and work study. We got the the Volunteer of the Year award for Central Georgia Goodwills, and they got to go to a banquet for that too. So my students are getting exposed to experiences they wouldn't have had otherwise if they hadn't been making art. The vice principal said, we've never done a soapbox before. Here's a white shell. Do you think you can do something with it? So I grabbed a couple students, we painted it, and the next week we won the best of show. The Macon Little Theater said, we're going to be performing The Miracle Worker. This is about Annie Sullivan and Helen Keller, both of whom I've quoted today. They wanted to show work from students who are blind. So we decided to do a theme of inspire. Who inspires you? And each student did a drawing. I called my friend Matt, who is the printmaking professor at Georgia College, and he said, yeah, my students can make screens. He's really into work study. His students came out, brought these silk screens, and we screen printed their drawings onto profiles of their face, which they hand colored, we mounted. This show was at the museum. They loved it so much they invited the whole school to come see their dress rehearsal, which they adapted for us by telling us where the sets were. Each actor came out and introduced their characters so they know their voice. And then the show traveled to Pittsburgh, and it traveled to Italy. So just recently, they've gone from only showing in their school building to exhibiting regionally and nationally and internationally. Never did set design before. I just keep going to the edge because people are asking me to do things I'm not good at. And the music teacher is like, we've never done programs with sets. Do you think you could teach a set design class? Fridays we have what's called expanded core curriculum, and one of that, it's like you can take a cooking class or Braille or orientation and mobility, rec and leisure, or career exploration. And so set design is one of those things. And last year we did the Veterans Day program. So that was 11 months ago. And then we got ready for the Christmas program and the Christmas party. This is probably a good slide to show you what someone who's totally blind can do to contribute. We have these wiki sticks that we can press down for stencils, and he can feel where it's wet and where it's dry. And stencils of snowflakes, you don't need to be able to see at all to be able to use that. And then as soon as that was over, actually, I only got my Friday group for one of the 4 quarters, so that was 9 weeks. I got 4 students, and I feel like they're my studio assistants. I feel like I'm still making art. I'm like, I have this vision for a rock and roll theme concert, and they do what I tell them to do. Right after that, we did our Alice in Wonderland theme, and I can just say, today we've got a couple hours, we're gonna do giant paper mache mushrooms, or tissue paper topiaries, or giant flowers to go around a doorknob, and they're learning skills and participating in their own prom. The hat design project was my regular classroom, became Mad Hatter hats for the tables, and we transformed our cafeteria last May into a wonderland. Art classes in high schools are kind of the gift shops where people come when they want something to give whoever the guest speaker at the school is, and they're also the garbage cans of the school. So people are giving me t-shirts that we cut up, and we did this weaving project. We do a lot of collaboration in my classroom. COVID, we couldn't use the water fountains. We had all these empty plastic bottles. So when we studied Dale Chihuly, we could do a new, chandelier. We had just had our media center redone, new furniture, new flooring. And so I said, let's make some art for that. So that's what we did, the chandelier, the weaving. We took the bottle caps and made 2 8-foot-long mosaics out of it. The hands of those children, you can see, they don't have any vision at all, but they can sort, someone who does can sort the colors, and then someone else can kind of arrange them. More garbage projects. We did kind of an upcycling trash and show. We had a trash and fashion. What do you do with just boxes of little hot dog holders? And we had like a photo shoot and pretend to be models and try things out. It's good. It's good to make a fuss about creative thinking and to try a bunch of different ideas. Just a couple weeks ago, we found a bunch of other wooden stuff I've been collecting over the year, and we made our Louise Nevelson assemblage piece sculptures. You don't need any vision to do that, to play with blocks. And last weekend, So not even a whole week ago, I took 4 students to Kentucky. My students had won national awards at American Printing House for the Blind and Sights contest. And so while we were there, we explored the city, we took a tour of the printing house, they got to meet the president of the company and have a fancy banquet, and that's what we do. I ask a lot of my students. I expect a lot of my students. The Lord expects a lot of each of you. I know He has big things in store for you in this lifetime and in the next. So I hope you keep making art. I hope you keep making mistakes and growing from them. I hope you keep being led by the Spirit. And I hope you go to the edge, because our prophet has told us that he will enable you to accomplish the impossible.